I just want to thank you, Jody, and Catholic Charities for inviting me to talk about one of the most important clinical symptoms of dementia. And I want to just see if I can advance my slide. Yeah, there we go. And I just want to really give a shout out to the amazing work that Catholic Charities is doing, and Hale Kuike. And of course, we at the College of Nursing and Health Professions are really thrilled to join, and we share a joint mission, and that is to really provide knowledge and skills to change the direction and journey of being a caregiver and living with dementia. I also need to thank my many funding sources that have supported the work of myself and my teams. And I just do want to say that I am going to be talking about a very novel intervention called the Tailored Activity Program, for which myself and my colleagues at different institutions are entitled to fees to be trained in that program. And also I will be sharing several resources that are books that I have co-authored. And again, I am entitled to royalties. Thank you so much for the invitation and for those supporting this webinar. I want to thank my funding sources, and I stated, and I believe this is recorded, some of the disclosures that I'm entitled, as well as other members of my team, are to royalties from books and an online training. And the big objectives for today are to describe what are dementia-related behavioral and psychological symptoms, and then how can they be prevented. And I'm going to talk about two approaches, the DICE approach and the Tailored Activity Program, and then a study that we currently have in progress. So I'm just going to do a check. Are they advancing, my slides?
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are.
Okay. Okay, so now we're going to go to the poll, if that's okay. And I'm not sure how you put the poll. Okay, so the first question is, has a health provider asked you or the person you care for about behavioral symptoms? And 43% of you said yes, and 57% said no. I have to tell you, that's a big change in the landscape. And I'm actually happy to know that it's still under 50%, and everybody should be asked about this. But typically everybody says, no, they've never been asked about that. So the vast majority of you have not been asked. Has a health provider ever systematically assessed for behavioral symptoms? And here we see that only 28% of you said yes, and 72% of you said no. And again, the 28% that said yes, I applaud your health providers and you for that, because this again is an area for which there is great neglect, as you see, is the experience of 72% of you. Have you received strategies for managing behavioral symptoms from a health provider? And here even less have said yes, 23%, and 77% of you said no, you have not received strategies. And has any of your health providers asked you if you are caregiving? And this is amazing to me, and I think this shows a change in the field, that close to 50% said yes, you have been asked about that, but still 51% of you said no. So the landscape is changing. I can tell you, a year ago when I asked these questions, it was 100% no for all of these, but at the same time, you can see that we have a long way to go, and that we have to change how dementia care is managed, and that being a caregiver is part of that constellation of care that has to happen. So thank you for participating, and for all of you, let's think about the kinds of behavioral symptoms that you are managing, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So I am having, okay, now can you see the next slide, common scenarios? I just need to check because I'm having trouble advancing. Okay, thank you. So these are just some common scenarios some of you may resonate with. I'm not going to read them all. And frankly, I could have had many other slides that had very detailed types of behavior. I'm just going to read a few of them. Your mother who you're caring for hears the mail being delivered through the mail slot and then is directed to the door and opens the door and leaves and walks out. Husband confuses shaving cream with cleaning fluids, which are in the same area, and begins to use the cleaning fluid to try to shave. A brother refuses needed help in bathing. Husband leaves a stove on. You're caring for your sister and it's really problematic for you and troublesome. And she asks the same thing over and over again. And we could fill in, as I said, many other kinds of scenarios. And I'm sure each of you who are caregivers, have had very specific behaviors. You'll notice from the ones I put here that they all occur within an environmental context. Something in the environment is triggering these behaviors, and we're going to return to that point in a moment. But also, you have to recognize that these are behaviors that are dementia related, that something's happening in the course of the disease. Your sister didn't do this before. She didn't repeat questions. Well, maybe, but typically not. Your mother didn't hide or hoard things before. So something's happening in the disease process. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But let me explain how these different kinds of behaviors are typically viewed in the world of research and neurology and in psychiatry. And they're typically clumped. All these different specific behaviors that you experience in others are typically clumped into these 5 areas: agitation, aggression, psychosis, depression, and apathy. But within, these are huge buckets, and within, lots of different behaviors occur. And we saw some of them on the other slide: rejection of care, restlessness, aggression. And what we're learning from the science is that these behaviors may not do well being lumped under agitation because that's such a big category, and that they may occur by themselves or they may co-occur with other behaviors, and we really don't necessarily understand all of their etiologies, and hence treatments have really been elusive. But there's more and more research showing the importance of really understanding very specific behaviors. The other thing I wanted to point out, that behaviors that aren't necessarily under these categories can be very disconcerting to people themselves and or to family members. So for example, loss of the ability to relate to a partner who you've been married to or lived with for many, many years is very problematic. And having empathy is just a major challenge. And this is true particularly for people with frontotemporal disease and their spouses. So certain kinds of disease etiologies do tend to have different kinds of behavioral manifestations that are problematic. So there are drug treatments for managing psychoses, but interestingly enough, these behaviors do not occur as frequently as the others here, and they may not be as upsetting to the individual themselves or the family member. But when they do occur and when they are upsetting, sometimes medications can be very helpful, and they're having a discussion with a health provider is very, very critical. I wanted to share with you some of the common care challenges that we hear in different studies. And this one is from a trial with my colleagues in Connecticut. It's called the COPE program. I'm not going to be talking about the COPE program, but in the COPE program, we ask caregivers, what are the most common challenges? And you can see several things from this slide. First, you'll see lots of behavioral symptoms: repeated questions, feeling overwhelmed, having the person, CR means the person who is living with dementia is worried and fearful, bathing and dressing, rejection of care in those instances, agitation, arguing, and aggression. One of the things you'll notice is that it's not 100%, right? Of 116 caregivers, everyone had a different challenge. And this is very important to recognize, because everybody who is helping and working with a person living with dementia will experience a unique constellation of challenges. And this is what makes working with people and families living with dementia so complex. Nothing will be one size fits all. And what's troublesome to one caregiver and one family may not be for another. So it's very important to have discussions with providers and to have very systematic assessments of what is it that is most challenging to the family. The other thing I want to point out is that most, well, not most, but a third, 34.5% of caregivers indicated that not having meaningful activities for the person living with dementia was very compromising, very challenging. And so I'm going to be talking about a program that does just that, that gives meaningful activities. And then what I also want to emphasize is look at that. Close to 50% of caregivers say they're really challenged by taking care of themselves. And so we don't want to lose the importance of being able to take care of oneself, because you can't take care of another person if you're a caregiver at this webinar unless you're taking care of yourself. And here is another survey of 239 caregivers, and you can see what behavioral symptoms were most problematic to them. They were asked, what behavior are you managing that's most upsetting to you as a caregiver? And you can see repetitive questions and followed by these other behaviors, with close to 80% of these caregivers indicating repetitive questions. And again, for any of these behaviors that you see here or on the other slide, there are no medications that are helpful. Unless perhaps there's a strong underlying depression or anxiety, and then sometimes a medication can be helpful. But at the same time, alone, we have found that that's not the case. And so what I'm going to be describing are what we refer to as non-drug, non-pharmacologic approaches to managing these types of behaviors. So the other important thing to know about behavioral symptoms is it is imperative that they be assessed. So it's great to see a growing number of you having that experience so that they can be treated, because the research shows clearly that these behaviors are bad for everybody. So for the person living with dementia, what we find is that if behaviors, even repetitive questioning or other behaviors that occur very severely, agitation and aggression, there's more rapid disease decline. There's an increased hospitalization, use of the ER and 911 calls. There's a poor quality of life for the person living with dementia. Behaviors are increasingly distressing to the person living with dementia. And also families find that they get a call if their family member that they're caring for is in an assisted living or a nursing home, and there are behavioral occurrences in that living arrangement. They may get a call from that facility to say, we can no longer care for your family member. So they're, again, very serious that we have to manage this. And it's not good for caregivers. And again, the research is really clear. Family caregivers end up having to spend more time providing care when there are behavioral symptoms. We've done a study where we have shown that managing 4 or more of the behavioral symptoms that have been mentioned so far is associated with greater depression and distress. And having these behaviors does trigger for many families the need to change the living environment of the person living with dementia, even if they don't want to. And it's associated with more increased care costs, out-of-pocket costs, missed work opportunities, for example, and or the need to have people come in and help, or to go to a facility. So this is just bad for everybody. And so they need part of dementia care must include assessment of behavioral symptoms and then some kind of treatment. So you may be asking, well, I said that these are related to dementia, but why do they occur? So this is a fancy model that I worked with my colleagues and the National Institutes of Health. And I'm not going to go through all of these boxes. There's something just very simple that I want you to understand from this model. The first is, as you, I'm sure, are well aware, dementia is a neurodegenerative progressive disease. And that means that it changes, it modifies executive function, the way if people can initiate or not, sleep-wake rhythms, how the person processes information, all of these boxes up here. It is a disruption to the brain circuitry. And all of these changes up here do result in behavioral symptoms. So there's something about the disease process itself, internal to the person, that contributes to these behaviors. And this complex upper level, if you will, of this model may potentially help inform drug treatments. But we're not there yet at all. But what I want to bring your attention to is the bottom half. With the neurodegenerative process and disruption in brain circuitry, what that does is it heightens the vulnerability of the person living with this disease to various external triggers. And if you see here, these triggers, and this is very important because this is about treatment, are modifiable. So we're going to be looking at triggers that are related to the person themselves. Maybe they're experiencing acute illness. Maybe they have pain and it's challenging for it to be expressed. Maybe they have unmet needs. Maybe they haven't slept well. There may be hunger or many other things, or related to the caregiver or caregivers. Maybe the behaviors are caused by inappropriate or complex communication. Maybe it's due to the caregiver's own poor health and inability to act on all 24/7 care. Maybe the caregiver has unrealistic expectations, and we often see that family members overestimate what a person can do. Therefore, they expect more. Therefore, that leads to a lot of frustration in the person living with dementia. Maybe there's limited resources that are really challenging the family in general, and that's part of the environment. Or it may be factors in the living environment. Maybe it's not stimulating enough. Maybe it's too stimulating. Maybe there's too much noise. I just visited a home in which a grandfather was living with his daughter with 3 children, and the TV was on consistently, and that was very agitating to him. What about lighting and seating, etc.? So what's important is that all of these factors that I just mentioned can be changed. And the question is, how do you know what is triggering the vulnerability and thus the behavioral symptoms? And we're going to look at that in a moment. But another way to think about these 3 areas is by thinking about a triangle. And that is thinking about the factors that may be contributing to a behavior that are associated with that individual. And we already went through some of these. What's happening with the caregiver, and I've already mentioned some of these factors, and what's happening in the physical environment. So I invite you to think about a behavioral symptom that you are challenged by, and we often teach our caregivers, make a triangle and think, let's be a detective here. What is it? happening to the person I'm caring for? Did they get enough sleep? Let's rule out different factors and identify what potentially could be the factors that are contributing to the behavior so that they can be modified and we can see if that makes a difference. And that's what I'm going to move towards now. And that is ways we can address these different factors. So just to reiterate, as I said, at this at this stage, at this point in the science, we do not treat behavioral symptoms very well. And again, I want to applaud the health providers who are assessing systematically behavioral and psychological symptoms, because it has to be part of the clinical management of the disease. And by the way, there are standardized assessments to help providers make that assessment. The other thing is that these behaviors occur at any disease stage and for any etiologies. There may be differences slightly by etiology and disease stage, but again, this has to be part of the management. Assessment of behavioral and psychological symptoms have to be part of the management of the disease process from the time of diagnosis to the end of life. I've already said that behavioral medications have very limited utility for the behaviors that are most disturbing to the person themselves and to the caregiver. And so we're really in an environment in which we have to look at non-medication approaches. And here, I'm going to say this multiple times in this webinar, one size does not fit all. And a strategy has to be tailored to the different factors that may be contributing to the behavior and what can be changed on the part of the family member. And to do that, my colleagues and I have developed an approach to help you and providers think through the relative contribution of any factors related to the individual, the caregiver, or the environment. And we call this approach the DICE approach, which is an acronym for describe, investigate, create, and evaluate. So I'm going to describe what each of these are, and then I'm going to give you some examples. So describe means that you identify one behavior and you think about what's challenging about it for you, when does it occur, where does it occur, and what does the behavior look like? Create means, as I said, think like a detective and rule out things, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. And from that, by ruling out and including factors, you create a treatment plan that includes a range of strategies, because typically it isn't one non-drug, non-pharmacologic strategy, a range of strategies to either prevent, mitigate, reduce, manage the behavioral symptom. And what's equally important is then to evaluate. And you don't have to be a scientist to do that, a researcher to do that. You can say, I used this strategy this morning and it seemed to really work. I communicated differently and my husband responded. That's what I mean by evaluate. So I'm going to go through an example. This one occurred in a residential facility, and then I'll go through an example in a home. So first, we're going to describe a behavior. This is Mrs. J. She's very, very frail. She lives in a residential facility, and she tried to leave the facility. She couldn't, so she started blocking the door. She was screaming and striking out. This is a real case. And she got increasingly aggressive with staff. What did the staff do? They were really, really worried, which you can understand, that Mrs. J might escape. They were concerned also, they had visitors, about the impression that this would make, that they were unable to address whatever the issues were for Mrs. J. And they were also worried that she would fall. and hurt herself. So there were many concerns of the caregiver. And what about the environment? It was really noisy. She saw the front door and she wanted to exit. And there was a concert going. So let's investigate. First of all, we have to know that Mrs. J was new to this area of the facility, and she moved from another part of the building. She was very, very anxious, and her meds have been increased without proper oversight as to its impact. She did have functional and cognitive fluctuations due to Parkinson's. She had moderate dementia, very poor executive function, and very importantly, she had a history of rape as a teenager. And this became very important because the staff started touching her and pulling her. So they were taken off guard, the staff, by her uncooperativeness. That's how they defined it. They didn't know her well. They weren't sure how to communicate. They were really scared and embarrassed. And they were very, very stressed. The environment was way too overstimulating to her. Her routine had suddenly dramatically changed. She saw the door and she wanted out, which you can understand that kind of response. So create. What happened? It was very important to rule out any acute medical issues because this was noted as a change in her behavior. There was a change back in her antidepressant medication back to its original dose. There was an agreement among the medical staff that antipsychotics should not be used because it could worsen her Parkinson's. And they also were concerned about her mobility. And so they explored the use of a walker for stability. The caregivers learned how to identify less overstimulating activities, how to use a calm communication. They began to recognize what memories and what elements in the environment elicited memories of a sexual assault. So they approached her differently, never from behind, only asked if they could touch her or lead her to a particular room, etc. And then the environment, they created not an overstimulating environment. They looked to change that. And then they had to evaluate. So they monitor her behavior, and then they began to evaluate each strategy and what worked, and a lot worked. And caregivers, the formal providers, started asking themselves, what approaches did they try? Which caregiver tried which approach, etc. And they were able to come up with a reasonable solution for her. And so this illustrates one illustration of how this approach can be applied in that environment. And now I'm going to show you in a living environment. So here we are with Mrs. B, and she recently moved in with her daughter in her small apartment. Mrs. B is at a moderate to severe stage of dementia, and she does sit in this easy boy chair. She does have, she's a fall risk. And to accommodate her mom, her daughter placed a commode right next to her. So it would be easy for her to, and she could do this, she had the strength. I'll just use the word transfer. That's not like maybe the most accurate word, but transfer from her seat to the toilet. But what is this? She sits in her chair every day, and the daughter was very concerned because she literally used the commode every 15 minutes, and she had nothing else to do. So her daughter withheld fluids in order to reduce the frequency of urination. The daughter also expressed serious concern about the quality of life, but she's really scared that her mom will fall. So she just has her sit there all day long, 12 hours a day before she goes into bed. Where is the commode? It's in her visual field. There's nothing interesting in her environment. And there's noisy music in the back of that from the radio that plays all day long. So what do you think's going on here? Well, first of all, I don't know what happened to my slides. There we go. Sorry. First of all, we have to rule out because due to the frequency of urination, whether she has any medication changes or a urinary tract infection, right? That would be your first guess. As a matter of fact, before we came in to work with Mrs. B and her daughter was about to go to the ER about that. Also, her skin integrity should be assessed because the daughter had withheld fluids for quite a while, and there's concern for dehydration. Also, what has to be investigated is her level of fall risk and what is she interested in, so we can design something while she's sitting there. The daughter also overestimates what her mom can do, and she asks her mom an open-ended question, "Mom, what do you want to do today?" And her mom says, "Nothing. I don't want to do anything." And that's what the daughter then acts on, when in fact, Mrs. B really cannot, be due to the stage of her dementia, really respond in a way to think through what activity she would like to do. And here, the only activity she sees is the commode. So she goes on a regular basis to the commode, which becomes like a activity for her. So what did we discover? So we ruled out any change in medications that were problematic, or medications were not problematic, did not cause the frequent urination. We ruled out a urinary tract infection. And then we moved the commode out of her visual field, but close by, because she was a fall risk, and that was an assessment that was made. Her daughter was taught what kind of toileting schedule to put her mother on, how to keep her mother hydrated throughout the day. And then we identified different activities that her mother could still participate in, which had to do with tabletop gardening and also flower arranging. And all the problems disappeared, in terms of these problems, I should say. So it gives you a sense of how you can apply the DICE program. Oh, that's one approach to managing behaviors. And now I'm going to very quickly talk about the importance of activity. And you saw it in Mrs. B, how important being engaged in flower arranging and gardening, along with other strategies, really helped. So I'm going to tell you about the Tailored Activity Program, which purposely, intentionally uses activities that are tailored to the abilities, as well as, very importantly, the interests of people living with dementia, and then instructs caregivers how to set up the activities, along with disease education and stress reduction techniques and ways to take care of themselves as caregivers. And I'm excited to say this is a program used throughout the world in about 9-10 different countries. It's been adapted for and tested in different settings, hospitals, homes, adult day services, and residential facilities. And we're really excited. There's about 9 trials now on tap that have shown a lot of promise. But why activity? So we found in our research, and many others have found, activity really matters to people. As a matter of fact, there's a paper that will be forthcoming by a group from, I believe, China, but don't quote me on that, showing that engagement in activities actually can potentially prevent cognitive decline. So activity is very, very important. Lack of activity is associated with behavioral and psychological symptoms. Understimulation is a source of behavioral symptoms. And also, research has shown that people need to have a sense of a role and a purpose in life, and that's enduring, regardless of disease state and disease stage and whatever disease you have. And then activity may have physiological benefits, and these are all things that are being explored. In the TAP program, we make an assessment, and it follows the triangular model. We assess the person, may see if they're a fall risk, their interests. We assess the caregiver. How are they communicating? Do they understand that the person cannot initiate an activity, meaning that their executive function has been affected by the disease, which means that they have to set up the activity differently? And what are their expectations, and what activities would they accept or not? We assess the environment for lighting and seating. and then put it all together and create what we call an activity prescription, in which the activities match the interests and the stage of the disease and what a caregiver and environment can handle. And then we instruct family caregivers how to use the activities on a daily basis. And the caregiver learns what the person can do or not. A typical response is, wow, I had no idea my mom could really sit there and be interested in, coloring this picture or painting this picture. And also something that families have to learn that we have found is that we've all grown up in many cultures in the United States have this strive for perfection. Anything we do has to be the right way, right? And in this case, that's not the case. If a person is engaged in an activity and it's of interest to them, it doesn't matter if they do it right or wrong. It's the act of being engaged that's important. And then, as I said, we teach stress reduction techniques. We observe how the caregiver is setting up the activity and we make adjustments. And then we show how activity can be used throughout the day and how those strategies of communication can be modified. And here are just examples, and I bet you can guess what each of these people were in their previous life. So this gentleman over here was a carpenter. On the left side, the woman above was a librarian, and they're playing dominoes, and that's pretty high level functioning, early stage, and this is a person who just loved games. And we have found just tremendous outcomes for caregivers as well as for people living with dementia, including the reduction of behavioral symptoms, so forth. So I'm going to conclude by sharing a study that takes some of the principles that I've just said and puts them together in an online platform that we call the We Care Advisor. And I'm just going to take a few minutes so we have time for questions to explain what the We Care Advisor is. This is a study in which we would like to enroll 326 families from around the country. And you'll see the eligibility requirements in a moment, but it really requires basically three things. You're a caregiver, you have a smartphone, a tablet, or a computer, and that you are managing one or more dementia-related behavioral symptoms. So this is a web-based application, and this is designed for the family caregiver, and you can use the We Care Advisor to learn about the behaviors you're managing and to go through the DICE approach. So there's all different sections to the We Care Advisor, which I will not go into in great depth, but we have a peer navigator, so you can choose who looks and feels like you, same age, relationship, and they'll explain how they used the We Care Advisor and kind of walk you through the tool. I have to say statically, this isn't a real person, but you'll see their image and their words. And then this is We Care uses the DICE approach. So and I'm going to show you that in a moment, we ask caregivers questions about DICE, how to describe the behavior, to investigate the behavior. We create tailored prescriptions, DICE prescriptions, and ask you to try the strategies and then to come back and evaluate what worked or not. We also receive daily tips. I just received one. I receive one every 4 o'clock Eastern time, and caregivers really resonate. Their tips to think about. And other key features is, as I said, this platform can be assessed on any device. It has a lot of very relevant content in what we call the Caregiver Survival Guide. Certain sections are voice activated. So if you don't get tired of reading, you can click a button and hear a voice explain the questions to you. The daily tips, as I said, is a very favored feature. And we are testing different prompts to see what works for family caregivers as to what will help them have We Care as part of their daily routines. So just going to flip through some, this is, gives you just a little sense of what the look and feel is, but you can hear how people have used the DICE approach. This gives you a sense of the questions for, in this case, the behavior was apathy, and you're asked a series of questions to describe the behavior, and then a series of checklists to see which of the factors, person-related, caregiver-related, environment-related, may be contributing to the behavior. And then we give a prescription, and these are the kinds of strategies we offer. And these strategies are very much tailored, or we try to tailor as much as possible to the responses to the other questions. And then we ask you to evaluate. How often did you use it? Has the behavior been resolved? Has it gotten worse? And then we ask, what do you want to do? Do you want more tips? Do you want to learn more about dementia, etc.? And these are just examples of some of the daily tips you receive. And then the Caregiver Survival Guide has a number of really helpful information. It's something we heard from caregivers in developing the tool. They wanted one-stop shopping. They wanted to have vetted information about what is behavior and what is dementia and how do I keep myself and the person I'm caring for healthy and so forth. So we get into a lot of that in the Caregiver Survival Guide, which is part of the platform. And in a small trial, and that's why we're doing a much larger national trial, we saw within a 1-month period that caregivers expressed decreased stress, improved confidence, and we also saw a trend in a small sample of 57 family caregivers, a reduction in the severity of behavioral symptoms. And here are just some of the things that caregivers say about the tool. Daily tips are awesome, the ease of use, love feeling the support. The survival guide is comprehensive. And here are the eligibility criteria. Basically what I said, you don't have to live with the person, but you should be living nearby, and the person should be living, the person with dementia should be living in the community. The tool is at this point all in English. And again, it is can be used, however, on a smartphone, a computer, a tablet. And if you're interested, there are many ways to get at us. And I also have Nicole Borones, who is the project director, and Melinda Webster, who's a project coordinator with us, and they can answer any questions. But just get in touch with us. We can explain about the study, and you'll really help us in terms of understanding the benefits of this tool, how it should be changed, and so forth. And so I just want to stop. Lessons learned. Behavioral symptoms can be prevented and managed. It does involve a problem-solving approach, whether you use the We Care Advisor or the Tailored Activity Program or DICE. A strategy effective for one family may not be acceptable or helpful to another, even if they're dealing with the same behavioral symptom. It really is a trial and error process, but we have developed very systematic ways of going about that. So also, I just want to leave you with some resources. We have a book called A Caregiver's Guide to Dementia that offers you a checklist of strategies that you find in the We Care Advisor. We've developed an online course through what's called Coursera, and that is free. And we have, I think it's up to 170,000 people around the world who have looked at least one of the 16 modules. It's very oriented to what is, how can you promote quality of life in both the person living with dementia and the caregiver. And we have a book that goes along with the with this course that goes into more detail. All of these resources are designed to help support quality of life through a really very challenging journey with dementia. And with that, I am going to stop. I thank you so much for your attention and really focusing on such a critical element that we're all trying to manage in dementia care. So I'll turn it back to you, Dorothy and Jody and the organizers to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gitlin. Thank you for your generosity sharing all about behavioral and psychological symptoms in dementia. It's very interesting, and all the resources. I'll be sending out these in a follow-up email. And if you all check your chat feature, Dr. Gitlin's colleagues that are working on the We Care Advisor have put in the contact information for We Care Advisor. There's a website, which you can find in the chat, an email, and also a phone number. And I'll follow up with that as well. Dr. Gitlin, if you wouldn't mind, there are some questions that came in.
Sure.
This is, what was the phone number for caregivers to call for support? I'm not sure this question is for the We Care Advisor specifically. If it is, please look in the chat feature because that phone number is there. I'll read it out loud. It is area code 267-359-1111. Again, that is 267-359-1111. I'm going to go off camera and continue with the questions. This question is, my spouse has problems toileting, had an accident in the care home common area. Then she fought the health aides who tried to help her get cleaned up, punched one in the stomach. How can you prevent this behavior? Medications, constant one-on-one monitoring, which is expensive.
Yes. So I think, again, this is a great example of how the DICE approach can help. And that means there isn't a single magic statement I can make or strategy, but it really means that we have to understand when this occurs, what the toileting patterns look like. Does this happen every time? That's described. The reaction of hitting and punching can be understood within the context of how possibly the formal caregivers behaved or interacted. So really understanding the situation is very, very important. Under what circumstances does these accidents happen? How do staff communicate? You need to know if they expressed disappointment or anger or frustration, or if they tried to move her away that was threatening to her. So all of these things have to be really examined. And from that, if you think of the DICE approach, you're describing, you're investigating and ruling out why she's having these accidents. There may be medical reasons too that may have to be explored. You could come up with a treatment plan. Now, I think in this case, and many institutions do use this concept of a huddle where they'll bring together the people, the the certified nurse assistant, the nurse staff, the housekeeping, anybody who was involved with the resident to begin to brainstorm just the way I said. What happened, why did it happen, and how are we going to address it? So that is how I would approach it. And I think it's very reasonable to go to the facility and to ask for a team meeting to understand more fully what happened and what are the measures they're planning to put into place so the behaviors will not occur, because hitting someone is traumatic to the person themselves. And there may be many reasons why that occurred. But this is a great example of where systematically applying DICE could be helpful.
Thank you. There was a comment, related to that. I'm caretaking 93-year-old mother-in-law. She has sundowner syndrome at times, asking me to give her medicine to go to sleep. She usually gets up after midnight. Please advise.
Yeah. So if you think of the triangle and the dice approach, I would put that behavior gets up at night. And that can be very disturbing to the person because their sleep pattern and wake pattern gets disrupted, which is not uncommon in dementia. So that's certainly something to bring to the attention of a doctor, the provider who's overseeing the care. I'm sorry, was it Judy, the mother? I didn't.
The mother-in-law.
The mother-in-law. So that's very important because it could be creating a vicious cycle of getting up and then sleeping during the day and then not being able to sleep. So I would look at what is the routine throughout the day. Does the mother-in-law have any stimulants, coffee, tea, sodas that have caffeine after 2 o'clock that could be contributing? Putting various activities throughout the day, such as the TAP tailored activity program suggests. For example, more cognitive stimulating activity around 11 o'clock or when the person wakes up before lunch, maybe a light exercise, again, depending on the abilities and interests of the person, but at night, soothing, maybe a massage, maybe it's, very soothing, calming music. That's something that the mother-in-law enjoys listening to, but is not overly stimulating. So there are definitely strategies that are non-pharmacologic to think about in this case. And I also think this is a discussion as well with a provider. And I would have that discussion and try other strategies in addition to or before going to daily sleep medications, because they can cause other kinds of complications. So that has to be explored very carefully with a medical professional.
Thank you, Dr. Gitlin. I just want to ask here, some people appear to have be in a habit of taking sleeping pills all their life. It seems like some people that have relied on medications, but then when they get dementia, they still want to take the sleeping meds and the anti-P at night meds, which cause drowsiness and can lead to falls. So it seems like the habit sort of has to be broken, right? In a way, because how do you feel about that? That sleep meds should never be given to someone with a fall?
Honestly, in this case, we really need the geriatrician on the team to discuss this. But what you're saying, which is really important here, when you're investigating, right, as part of DICE, you have to understand the history and what the effects of potentially having taken these meds for a very long time. There may be physiological dependencies there besides what you suggested as habitual. And so this is where in dealing with behaviors, it's never one profession, it's a team. And I would bring right away the geriatrician, and part of understanding the behavior and investigating is what is the history here? What are they used to? And what does it mean if they don't take it? And there's so many other considerations. What other kinds of medications are they taking? And how does it interact with the sleep medication? And in what way is dementia disrupting the sleep pattern so the meds may or may not work anymore? So again, these aren't simple situations. But in a way, and I think this is really challenging for us, Jody, it's always up to the caregiver to figure out, well, I got to get the team together, right? I got to investigate here and bring people together. But that's our best answer at this point.
Thank you. The person who did describe the spouse who was in the care home is adding that she is aphasic and she cannot say, I need to go.
Exactly.
Which adds to this.
Exactly. So in brainstorming with the team that's caring for her, that is a critical piece of information, because then there may be other signals that she's giving, or if it's, I'm not in any way suggesting limiting fluids, but monitoring her fluid intake and putting her on a toileting and fluid schedule may really help in this case. And then there, people who are caring for her and know who she is may understand some of the signals that she is giving, that she does have to go to the toilet. That's really important information that was just provided.
Thank you. One person chatted in about DICE appears similar to basic scientific method or continuous improvement cycle. I feel fortunate that our geriatric team does something similar with us regularly. I'm going to ask that caregiver to let us know what team you're going to. What healthcare center are you going to? That's great.
And if I could add just a little history here, what we did, and you're absolutely right, that comment is right on. We assembled under Dr. Helen Kales, who's a geropsychiatrist leadership, we assembled a team that flew in, a group of experts, medical, psychiatry, behavioral. I'm a sociologist by training. And we talked about, this was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And we all talked about the different approaches that we use to manage behavioral symptoms. And as a team, we then solidified, we saw the commonalities. And what they ended up being was DICE. And by naming and framing what this problem-solving approach is, because it's a basic problem-solving approach, that is absolutely true, it gave it legs, and it's something that we can offer clinicians as well as families to follow. And so it feels, I've been doing DICE way before it was ever called DICE. And so were many of the clinicians and researchers in the room when we came together. And so there's a paper in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society that explains where DICE comes from. But I want to emphasize the naming and framing of it provides a very systematic approach in behavior, to look at behavioral symptoms. And I should say DICE starts with describe, but there's a step before DICE. You have to assess. You have to ask, what behavioral symptoms are occurring. And then you can move on to the DICE approach. And you have to keep assessing and reassessing. So thank you for that comment.
Yes, he just added that the team is at Kaiser. So they have a good geriatric team at the Honolulu Clinic at Kaiser. Okay,
Excellent.
Next question. For the person living with dementia, you said that the behaviors are distressing to the person. Do you mean that their own behaviors are distressing to them?
So maybe I was too, I didn't mean that universally, like every behavior is distressing to the person, but behaviors can be very distressing. You can have a very distressful hallucination, right? The being restless, pacing back and forth, being agitated is disturbing to a person. So not every behavior is, but many of our behaviors are, or some of the behaviors really point to other underlying issues. I had just mentioned very briefly, repetitive questioning can occur for lots of different reasons, but a very common reason is anxiety, a loss of control over one's daily life, of knowing what's going to happen next, of being able to control what's happening next. I mean, think of what you do throughout the day, and you have a schedule and you know where you're going and what's going to happen, and you plan and so forth. And all of those in processes become disturbed and lost as people progress through the disease. And so many times, asking the same question over and over again, it's really reflecting underlying anxiety and a loss of control, and not knowing what's going to happen, or being very fearful of what may be happening to them because of the disease, or in the day? Where are they going to be safe and secure? So that's kind of what I meant.
Thank you. Would the DICE framework be regarded as a therapeutic formulation?
Yeah, I could say, yeah, I think that's the case. And I can follow up with you, Jody. There is a training program at University of Michigan. I don't have that, and I don't know, Melinda, if you can find it right away, but I don't have the website. But caregivers and providers can be formally trained in the DICE approach, and there is a online training. There is a manual that there's just I don't even know if there's a small fee that goes along with that. And it's applicable to any environment, any situation. It can be used by caregivers themselves or providers. And we will hopefully be able to start a study formally testing how to embed it in primary care practices. And Dr. Kales, who's now at the University of California, Davis, is heading up that trial. That won't happen for a while, but it's exciting because we'll formally be able to place it in primary care and see how to train members of a primary care team to use DICE. So hopefully 100% of people, when we poll next time, will say that they are being systematically assessed and treated for behavioral symptoms.
That's great. Thank you. To what degree must one be involved to be considered a caregiver?
Yeah, right. What does it mean to be a caregiver? So you asked a really interesting question, and believe it or not, there isn't consensus in the literature. And if you look at the studies, each study defines the particular caregiver that or a caregiving situation that they're including in their study. So we like to think of being a caregiver as providing extraordinary care. So, for example, my husband had COVID. I cared for him. That's what we do, right? I then had COVID. He cared for me. I would not consider him or me a caregiver in that situation. My father had extraordinary medical complications and care needs due to cancer, due to cognitive decline. He needed extraordinary care. We were in and out of the hospital weekly and had tubes in his stomach that had to be cleaned, etc. So that's extraordinary care. And with dementia, in the very early stages, the person living with dementia needs a care partner. And that is the preferred term, because the person is just providing, I don't mean just, but is providing support, direction, and that is controlled by and directed by the person living with early stage dementia. By the time you move to mild and moderate stages, that care partner typically becomes more formally a caregiver because they're providing more care and hands-on care. So I'm not suggesting that being a caregiver means that you're providing hands-on care. You could be a caregiver when you are delivering meals every day to your mom, or you're making the phone. You know, we all care in different ways, right? We check on our relatives by phone and we arrange for doctor visits, etc. So there is a subjective definition here. And many people, one of the issues is many people do not consider themselves a caregiver. And that is a little problematic because you'll see in our study that and I said the term, right, that we are seeking caregivers. So you sort of have to identify as a caregiver and say that you're responsible for most of the care. You don't have to be responsible for all the care, but maybe for most of the care. So it's a really intriguing question. And I just want to say one more thing, Jody. This is probably more than what the person who asked the question wanted to know. But when you look at studies, The reason why the number of people who are determined, who we say are caregivers, varies. So you can look at a study and it'll say, population-based study, it'll say there are 65 million caregivers. You always want to know what that definition is of what they included. Or another study will say 45 million. So or another study will say, like with dementia, of course, those are for caregiving for any kind of disease state. But in dementia, the National Alzheimer's Association has come up with a formula and has determined that there are 11 million caregivers, primary caregivers, meaning people who are primarily responsible for the day-to-day care. So that's a long-winded answer to a really important
Thank you.
question.
Thank you. We have 15 minutes left. Dr. Gitlin, if we go a little bit over, we have 9 questions left. I would advise not to put in any more questions at this point. If you have questions, then you can email me of that, but we'll try. How do you feel about that, Dr. Gitlin? If we
Oh yeah, no, I'm
Oh,
fine.
great.
I'm here.
Thank
I'm here for
you.
you.
It would be nice when you're done to introduce the We Care advisor folks
Absolutely.
after we are through with the questions, so they can
Sure.
answer questions related to that. So this is a comment. Seems like an investigator caregiver can assume more of a supportive than primary role with persons with dementia living in an assisted living home and does not spend as much time in direct care.
Yeah, so I think that's very situational because there is research that shows that when a family member is relocated to a facility, that yes, the care responsibilities change, but there are still care responsibilities. So I think the point of the question is that the responsibilities change, and I would agree with that. And some people experience that they have the same responsibilities because of staff shortages or whatever. And others find that it's not the case. And that they have, can just bring special guests and have, be involved with activities with the person. I do find it's highly variable by family and residential facility.
Thank you. How do you deal with 2 persons with different symptoms in one household?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I think this is something that is really complex because caregivers, family members are not just caring typically for one person, really. And we see that more and more. They could be caring for their mother and father. They could be caring for a child with a severe disability and an older parent. And so this is very challenging. But I would, in the case of managing, and I'm just being hypothetical here, let's say a mother and father living in your house and both have dementia, I would apply the DICE perspective to each. Because even though the environment may be similar, they may be having different reactions to the environment, right? And have different interests and so forth. So this is why there's complexity here. It has to be tailored to the person and their living environment. But you could apply the similar problem-solving, approach, the DICE approach. But whatever, what I had said before, what can work for one person may not work for another. But that's a complex situation. And I encourage that there be other family members who help out. Adult day services is such a critical service because it can provide an opportunity for enrichment for the person living with dementia, as well as respite for the caregiver. And so I really think developing a network that can really help with any situation, but this one in particular is very critical.
Thank you. My cousin is 2 years older than I have been taking, my cousin 2 years older than I has been caring for my auntie whose dementia is progressing. She asked her older sister for help. Her sister complains, but eventually helps sometimes. Her older sister doesn't offer to help and complained when she needed to go on vacation due to stress of caregiving. Is there any way to convince her older sister to help out more consistently? Because her younger sister is starting to break down from caring for my auntie most of the time by herself.
Really, really hard situation. And this isn't the solution, but to say it's very common. And so I just want to deviate and tell a story that I was in South America giving a lecture, and someone asked a similar question, and they said, you know, that their sister in the south of Chile thought that they were trying to steal from their mother and refused to believe that the mother was really having, you know, had dementia and so forth. I only give that case because it's not uncommon that family members who are not intimately involved, or for whatever reason have a different relationship to the person, or are angry, you know, just the whole family dynamics is such that they are not participatory, or they have complexities in their life that make it very challenging for them to participate. So this is very challenging. I find that one approach that can be helpful is to call someone from the outside to have a family meeting and to have a health provider, a geriatric social worker, a nurse practitioner trained in dementia care. We've used occupational therapists trained in our approaches in this situation to have a family conference. And for example, in the TAP approach, we often ask the caregiver to involve, the mother will say, my sons don't get it, and they just think I'm making things up. Like, let's bring the sons in, and have an outside person really explain what's going on with in this case, the aunt, or, the mother or the father or whatever, as the expert, have very simple, straightforward education materials. And then move from an education to say, this is what's happening. And this now is a family matter, and there has to be planning. So I think bringing in an outside person can be very, very helpful. So that does take resources to pay the person if that's the case. But Jody, you may have some suggestions here as to whether any of the services you provide can do that kind of consultation, but taking it away from the onus on, the niece here, I believe, I think is really important, in bringing in an outside so-called objective person, asking if necessary for a provider to be on a telephone conference. It's very, telephone conference call where the whole family, is part of it, I think is very important. I think, having said that, that doesn't mean, there's a magic wand here and then everyone's going to participate. And then what happens is, and I don't have a good strategy for this, it is the primary caregiver that has to think through and come up with a task list of what would be helpful, because that's hard. Like, someone else, even if they might, they may be reluctant to help, but even if they want to help, they may not have a clue what needs to be done. So coming up with a schedule, a task list that's really specific, can be very helpful to structure these conversations. But if at all possible, an outside expert coming in can be a powerful intervention for the family.
Thank you for that. There is a mediation center of the Pacific here that does free family counseling, free family conferencing. It's available via Zoom, and it tries to get the family members to come and meet, and they consider the person with dementia more than anything else. What do they want? What would make them happy? What would be the most comfortable for them? Sometimes a family member may not be the right person to do it if they don't want to do it, right, Dr. Gitlin? Some people just can't do it. They're just not good at it.
Absolutely. Sometimes they can't, but they can help in other ways. And that's why a family meeting really helps. because people have to have trust and feel that they can express what they can do and what they can't do. And there's other ways of supporting somebody. I mean, families have all different arrangements. Sometimes a family member who cannot provide care for whatever reason, physical, psychological, they can financially help. They can make phone calls and arrange doctor visits. They don't have to do hands-on care. So there's so many things that have to be done, and articulating what they are and really getting a sense and helping the family come up with a division of labor that fits what each family member can do can be very, very, very helpful.
That's a right on answer. Yes, somebody wrote in that could the older sister contribute financially so that her sister can get paid respite care, like adult daycare or caregiver. And that's what the Mediation Center of the Pacific does. It's available on Oahu. They try to figure out what each family member can do and would be willing to do. And it's free. It's a free service.
That's terrific. That's so needed. That's terrific.
Okay.
And, I just want to say one thing. I don't think we think about this. I mean, and maybe counseling is a scary word to some people, but I love the mediation concept. This is bringing everybody together. This is what when you're in the hospital, you have a team meeting, right? Bringing everybody together. This is what's going on. This is what needs to be done. Who's going to do what? So it's very similar to that, and really respecting what people can do and what they can't do. But the whole family can brainstorm different solutions, and people do come up with interesting approaches.
We will send this to everybody, but one of the attendees did say that there's a webinar coming up from Mediation Center of the Pacific called Resolving Conflict Without Blame, being offered by St. Francis Caregiver Education, and it's being held on August 10th. I'll send that link to everybody so that you know about Mediation Center of the Pacific. Thank you. Okay, somebody is suggesting about the sleep meds, to substitute Tic Tacs for sleep meds.
Yeah, because that's still the habit of taking something, and maybe that's disturbing to the person. It's procedural habit that they took the pill. That's an interesting solution. That it's not, it's a placebo basically, but that strategy builds on it may be a lifetime or many years habit of I go to bed, I take a pill, and that's the procedural element the person is responding to, the person with dementia. That's a nice creative approach.
Okay, we've got 5 more questions. We'll get through them here. And then after that, we'll introduce your 2 colleagues who can put your contact information again. Next question is, my stepdad still allows 90-year-old mom to take her own meds, which she undertakes or overtakes. He then argues with her, and I find this dangerous. What is my stand as her live-in daughter and caregiver, as well as the medical laws about this, if any, please?
I really can't comment on the laws. I'm not sure here, but the concern is a concern. So I question I assume the father's the primary caregiver, and what is his understanding of dementia? So sometimes when someone's doing something and they're allowing the person to do something that could cause harm, then we have to come up with an approach. But sometimes in this situation, what the husband may be trying to do is to preserve dignity and a sense of who that person was, because she always took her meds herself. And so it's really important to engage the husband as to what are his care goals and what does he want to see. And in this situation, and again, it's going to be highly varied. I've just heard husbands and or wives say, I want my wife to be safe. I want her to have control over what she does. I want her to have choice. And some of those things have to do then, it leads you to then helping the person first understand that some of those things can be accomplished, but they have to be accomplished in a different way because the disease process makes it really challenging to his wife to take the meds in an appropriate way. So you have to kind of get at the bottom of why it's so important for him to let her take her meds when in fact it can cause great harm. So you can't ignore it. It has to be addressed. And then there's just, I really questioned his understanding of the disease process and where his wife is at. And he may be overestimating where his wife is at. I would think he thinks that she can do more than she is able to. And so that, again, has to do with disease education and understanding why he's allowing this, because it's fitting some care goal that he has, which could be applauded. And that is to enable her to be autonomous. But this is a situation, we could come up with other ways that she can exert choice and autonomy. But this is a serious situation where it's not helping her, right? It's really causing great harm. So there has to be an intervention here. And this is where like TAP I really highly recommend a referral and involvement of an occupational therapist who is trained in dementia, because what they do, and we've done this in our other programs, is evaluate what the person living with dementia can do. And in this case, if she's already making, over or under taking meds, her decision-making and her judgment is impaired. And this is something that would come out in an assessment by an occupational therapist, who then can help the father understand what his wife can do and can't do, how to give her meaning through activity and other approaches, and how to provide the medications in a safe way. So I think that's another referral that could be extremely, extremely helpful.
Thank you. This person asked, what is my stand as her live-in daughter? Well, I must tell you, your stand is to stop this from happening. If she's overtaking and undertaking her medications, it is dangerous, and you can figure out what to do as the daughter. You're the one making sense right now. So, you can find a way, as Dr. Gitlin mentioned, to get perhaps an outside person, get the doctor to do a referral to a nurse to come to the home, something like that, so that he has to understand that this is dangerous. They can.
And Jody, if the mother, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if the mother is on Medicare, for example, she could get a referral from an occupational therapist. And through an assessment, they would know whether the mother can take meds or not. I mean, we know from the description that she can't take her meds on her own, but she could do an the occupational therapist could do an assessment, and it's paid for through, a home care service. And so discussing with the doctor for such a referral could be very helpful.
Yes, so you have to take a stand, and it is important, and you got to keep at it. But a person, I'm not going to go too much into this. Somebody commented that they put a week's worth of meds in a pill organizer so they are easily accessed by the caregiver. At this stage, the person with dementia should not be handling individual bottles. That was a comment. Also, she said, I put pills in a small dish breakfast, and he takes his pills before he can start eating. Until recently, I had him writing down the time in a small pocket calendar so he can look up whether they've been taken. Helps avoid arguments. Yeah, there's lots of different solutions.
There's lots of strategies here. I think a dispenser is important, but then it has to be filled, and who can fill it. And I don't know the cognitive abilities of the husband, So I think, again, an assessment here is really important.
Yes,
of both. Yeah.
Any advice on how to get your loved one to agree to see a doctor if we see the early signs? like the
Oh,
repetitive questions, argumentative
yeah.
personality, anger issues. She feels she has no issues, but her personality has been changing recently.
Yeah.
So we're concerned and would like to know so we can revise how we engage with her. Seems recently her reactions to us have become overreactive, and a lot of time does not make sense to us.
Yeah, well, I'm going to solicit the help of you, Jody, and others, because this is a very common issue. And it's definitely in the communication here. This is where, primary care could, a visit to a primary care doc could step in and make a referral and say, this is really important, because sometimes people will not necessarily go along with what a family member says, but with what their doctor says is important. So it is in the communication of what this is about. If there are, everybody is so different. So if a person has any insights and that can be drawn upon, we've worked with somebody who recently who noticed changes in their ability to, they were doing financial matters in an accounting firm, and they really noticed they weren't as sharp with numbers before. And they themselves had that insight. So if a person doesn't have that insight, it is very, very challenging. That's why I don't know if there's anybody from primary care on the webinar, but I just think it has to be normalized as part of the primary care annual checkup, where a cognitive status exam is provided and discussion, particularly after a certain age, of abilities and functioning at home, because it normalizes then versus then the primary care provider can make a referral to a specialist if more tests have to be made. But it needs to be part of, an annual or biannual assessment, particularly by a certain age. And that's happening, but slowly. I don't know, Jody, what do you think?
Yeah, somebody did comment a suggestion, somebody that seems to be with primary care that understands this, that yes, a checkup with the primary care physician is probably the first step. And that, to send a list of observed behaviors and questions and send ahead of time. So you don't have to do it in front of the person, and they can do a preliminary assessment and, more important, refer to a geriatrician, as well as helping rule out physical issues. And the person, is it very important to catch this early? Yes, it is, right, Dr. Gitlin? To try to prod somebody, it is so common. We hear this every single time there's a webinar, that somebody doesn't want to see a doctor. What can you do? It does take some, like a third person, like not a family member, like the doctor or a respected friend or something.
Yeah. I'd also call the provider, whether it's the primary care or the specialist, to ask what they have found to be successful in their own practices to bring somebody in. I think harping on it a lot isn't good, because it just makes the person angry and turns them off. So the person has to be willing to go. And that's why normalizing a practice of checking in on changes in a person's life is so very, very important.
Okay. When working with the team on adjusting behavior medications so mother can continue attending daycare, how long before we can see behavior stabilize? And is there any advice on how to handle this period?
Well, I mean, again, I think that's very medical, it depends upon the medication, the dosage, the type of behavior, and those are great questions to ask the provider who is providing the medication, and does it have to be titrated up or down or whatever. But whether a person is taking meds or not, the strategies, the non-pharmacologic strategies, are really important. So that's what you use when you're waiting for other things to kick in, right? I mean, they go hand in hand. And all medical associations worldwide and in our own country have stated that the first line of treatment for any of these behaviors, except, of course, in the case where a person is trying to harm themselves or others gravely, is a non-pharmacologic. So even when meds are provided, meds alone will not take away some of these behaviors. So it's for some behaviors, it's really a combination, and that's how you have to think about it. But those are really important questions to be clear about with the prescriber.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's hard to answer that quickly without a complete assessment from the person's doctor and team. Okay, ageism is alive and blocking my family's involvement in these practical solutions. They use common sense well, but avoid assessment, seeing most behaviors as old age instead of taking time to understand what's happening. That's not to say they don't figure things out eventually, but it takes horrible incidents before they get to a reactive solution. I just had to call saying my dementia-affected mother just fell and broke her hip while trying to make it to her recovery center room on her own. I see her stubborn determination as a survival skill. However, her treatment team is constantly reacting rather than being proactive. Which of your publications would you recommend for my family to read?
Well, first, thank you for asking. That is so challenging. And I just want to point out certain things that the participant mentioned. So ageism is alive and well. We really saw it with COVID. There were actually headlines in the newspaper, and also also worldwide, COVID is a baby boomer killer, let it go, let them, die. I mean, we saw lack of really effective policies for visitation rights. Like if you were having a baby, your partner was allowed to come into the maternity ward. If you were on hospice, you were not allowed, your partner was not allowed. So these are, and without really any, much science here. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that ageism is huge. And there is still stigma around having cognitive changes. And we're always, fighting these things. And then we have a culture on top of that of reactivity. And in our country in particular, this incredible drive for perfection and independence. And so I just think we need to recognize this is the fabric that we're working in, right? It doesn't solve your challenge, but I think, it's important to understand that what you're seeing is something that's experienced by others. I do think that it's very helpful for people to look at DICE because it is designed to address behaviors that are occurring, but the strategies introduced can be preventive. I do think the book by myself and Kathy Pearsall, which is just a checklist of different strategies that are part of the We Care Advisors online platform, could be helpful. I'm going to think a little bit more because you're also pointing out this challenge we have in geriatric care, and that is balancing autonomy with safety. And our residential facilities and the regulations are always on the side of safety, and we can understand that, but at the expense of autonomy. And the decisions sometimes even that we make at home, it's our first goal is safety. And however, I contend that there are always ways to come up with other strategies to enable a person to engage and to feel connected, and in that way to feel a sense of personhood. But autonomy, as we define it, I'm going to do it myself, I don't need a walker, I'm going to, it doesn't help the person. So we have to help people cognitively reframe what does independence mean? And it's we're really very interdependent. And but it's hard. I mean, yeah, it's hard, and they're hard discussions. However, I want to go back to referral by an occupational therapist, because they're misunderstood and undervalued in these situations. But that's where an assessment of where the person is at in term and coming up with creative solutions for the right balance between autonomy and safety. They can achieve that. They can help achieve that just right balance.
The person that wrote that in is very familiar with the Alzheimer's Association. And I know that another helpful person gave a suggestion. I know you all can see the Q&A of a book, Surviving Alzheimer's by Paula Spence Scott. And also the Alzheimer's Association has a soft cover book about distressing behaviors. Thank you for that. We only just have a couple more questions. Difference, if any, between dementia and cognitive impairment, or is cognitive impairment a form of dementia?
Yeah, these terms are really hard to understand. So dementia is a form of cognitive impairment, but you can have cognitive impairment due to other issues, other things. My father had cognitive impairment due to hypoxia. So his cognitive impairment didn't look anything like dementia, but that meant that he still had challenges in problem solving and judgment and things like that. So in a very, very early stage, the term may be used, there's mild cognitive impairment. And in some cases with memory loss, that advances to a dementia. And in other cases, it may not. So it is important to differentiate those terms.
Thank you. Okay, then. The person who wrote about the mother, I'm not sure which one, that HIPAA rules make it really hard to discuss this with her doctor. When you had mentioned discuss this with your doctor, I know that if you're not the primary care, if you're not the power of attorney, sometimes they won't let you in the room. That is a problem.
Yeah.
But we don't have time to go into this right now. That you're right. Sometimes they won't talk to you, but that's why it's good to have a geriatrician, right?
Yeah.
Because they're able to do a better assessment and say, hey, we want to talk to the person who cares for this person the most. With a regular primary care, they'll only see you for 15 minutes, and they may discourage somebody to come in if they're not related or if they're not the power of attorney. Anyways, that's a whole other thing. The last question we'll get to: any advice for managing persons with dementia who display inappropriate behaviors such as flirtatious comments, sexual innuendo, and attempt to touch others inappropriately? Difficult to participate in social and communal activities due to these behaviors, but isolation seems to make the behavior worse, as it seems an attempt for attention and connection with others.
Yeah, not an uncommon concern. And I think the DICE approach works here, right? I mean, when does the behavior occur? How does it occur? Really investigating why it may occur. If it's attention getting, and that was one of the hypotheses, right? Because that's what we're doing when we're investigating, we're ruling out different hypotheses. Then there may be other ways to give attention. Maybe the person is starving for touch and massage helps. I mean, so really, this is why there isn't one magic, strategy. There are different strategies that could be applied, but which strategy works for which person will depend upon what, understanding the context in which these behaviors occur.
Thank you. Well, you have been so generous at answering our questions, Dr. Gitlin. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Let's bring in, to turn on your cameras, Nicole and Melinda right now, so that everyone here, we have 80 people left. Could you guys give a little nutshell how to contact you for the We Care advisor and why this might be good for Hawaii caregivers to be involved in your study?
Sure. So I'm Nicole Baranis. I'm the project director. Melinda has been very kind in adding the contact information in the chat. We've spent the last hour and a half listening to Dr. Gitlin. Many of you have asked questions. The We Care advisor provides a way to discuss the behaviors that you've asked about and try to answer questions about it and get solutions and strategies to test out, see what works and what doesn't. And the wonderful thing about this tool is that it's available to anyone who has a smartphone, a tablet, access to the internet, which many of the people who have been on this call have if they're on it. So it's something that can be used at any time. So I think especially for Hawaiian caregivers who maybe they might be in rural areas and maybe don't have access to some of the resources, this is a great way to try something new and see if it works. I do want to mention, so we are based in Philadelphia, but we do work across all time zones. We have people from Hawaii already who have reached out to us. We have people from Alaska. We have people pretty much every time zone right now. So we are happy to work with your schedule and do, meet you where you are in terms of learning about the study and signing up. And I'll pass it over to Melinda for a hello and any other information.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. So as said, I'm Melinda Webster, and my face, or well, my name has been the friendly one popping in the chat box here and there throughout. Please feel welcome to reach out to us, whether it be by our website. We do have a form on the website itself if you don't want to have to email or call us. If you prefer either of those methods, you're certainly more than welcome to do that. I'm generally the main person that monitors our email anyway, so we're happy to get back to you with whatever works best for you. But I'll just reiterate everything that Nicole said, that we absolutely respect that as caregivers, your time is limited. And so we will work around whatever works best for you. There is no expectation that you have to use the tool a certain amount. Obviously, we hope that people find it helpful and use it as much as they want, but you can use it as much or as little as you want. And that in and of itself is valuable information for us. So just genuinely, thank you so much for allowing us to be here today.
Thank you so much, all of you. I'm hoping that any professionals here, if you have caregivers that might be interested in this study, please, I'll send a follow-up email also with the link so you can forward it to them. Dr. Gitlin, are there any final statements you'd like to make?
Well, we just want to thank you for this opportunity, and you've met Nicole and Melinda, and we have a really terrific team, very dedicated to finding out what works best for families. And so we think it's a great experience to be part of the study, and you're really helping to be part of the study. You're really helping us, change the face of dementia care. And I just really appreciate all the work that Jody, you and everybody does in Hawaii. And this is such a critical topic. So thank you for really shedding light on this.
And thank you for your tireless work and communicating all of this to all of us. And you guys, thank you so much, and have a great week, rest of the week and weekend, and aloha to everyone.
Aloha.
Thank you for being here.